Hi, everybody. Welcome to the PerformHappy Podcast. I am so excited, like personally excited for the conversation that we're about to have. My chiropractor has been helping me with my post gymnastics body for years now. I'm the kid who's super bendy and was always had sprained ankles. My wrist hurt, my back hurt, my neck hurt, and I was like, well, this is just life as a gymnast or as a former gymnast. And she put me in touch with her bestie who specializes in hypermobility and is going to give us tons of knowledge for you little athletes and you former athletes like me who there is hope apparently that we don't have to be in pain all the time. So anyway, Dr. Taylor Goldberg, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. And yes, your chiropractor is my best friend and is the one who got me through my hypermobility journey. So I'm so happy she connected us. And yes, you can have hope. There's a lot of hope for this population. So I'm excited to chat today.
Awesome. And I think, us bendy ladies, we get a good rap in, figure skating and cheer and gymnastics, which is most of the sports that I help with. It's like really, you want to be able to put your feet behind your head and you want to be able to do the party tricks but there's a cost though with mobility. And I didn't realize that I think a lot of my pain was related to how flexible I am. I know in pregnancy, my body just like fell apart. I don't even know where to start. Can you first tell us what is hypermobility? Like, what's your definition of it?
That's a good place to start. So by definition, hypermobility means one of your joints goes past the designated end range. If you have that in 5 or more joints, you have what is called generalized joint hypermobility. Generalized joint hypermobility can then split off into 2 sections, asymptomatic and symptomatic. Asymptomatic are those really lucky people, the Simone Biles of the world, who don't have any symptoms but are extra bendy, and they get to just use that to their advantage. It's really important to know that asymptomatic hypermobility exists and that hypermobility doesn't always have to be a problem, because especially right now with the internet and social media, it can seem really, really scary. And so I do want you to know that it exists. Now, if you are experiencing pain or subluxations, which is when your joint partially comes out of its joint and then comes back in, or if you've ever had a dislocation of any joint, that means you're symptomatic. So symptomatic generalized joint hypermobility can then be stemmed into 2 other categories, acquired and genetic. Acquired means you got this hypermobility from something. Most commonly, a sport like gymnastics or cheerleading or ice skating or swimming or dance. You can also get this from trauma, like a car accident or falling, especially falling out of a stunt, falling in a tumbling pass, anything in that realm. And also, we're starting to realize that you can even acquire this from emotional trauma or post-viral illnesses like COVID and mono. The other side is genetic, meaning you were born with this. And when it's in that genetic category, that's labeled as a genetic connective tissue disorder. There is a lot of connective tissue disorders. The most common is something called hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. That is the one we see most often, and that is the one that we're going to be talking about the most today. The other thing you're going to hear me talk about is hypermobile spectrum disorder. What that means is that you have 5 or more joints in your body that go past their end range. You're in chronic pain of some sort, and you have some level of musculoskeletal involvement, meaning some form of subluxations, dislocations, something in that realm, but you don't necessarily meet the very specific criteria for HEDS. What I want you to know is that HSD and HEDS, as of right now, treated exactly the same level of severity. Nothing needs to change. Don't downplay it. It deserves the same amount of help.
Okay. Okay. So,
That was a
and
lot.
so
That was a
I'm
lot.
like, all right. So is it like the elbow that bends backwards? That's like the
Yep.
kind of the classic one I see in the gymnasts,
Yeah.
or
So if
like
you
the thumb that touches the wrist. Are those, what are some of those? Like if the parents are like, what are the 5? What are kind of the big ones that you look for to know?
Yes. So the big ones would be elbows and knees. So if your elbows bend super far back, if you're hitting a high V and your coach is like, why does it look like that? You're probably hypermobile. Your knees, if they bend backwards. Also, if you stand and you're almost bow-legged in a way, that can be part of this as well. And then, yeah, wrists, thumbs, anything in that realm, shoulders. If you were told you were double jointed, or if you have like a favorite party trick, I know for me as a kid, I would jump rope with my arms. Your shoulders are hypermobile. And then hips. So if you can take your leg and put it behind your head, your hips are hypermobile.
Okay. Yep. Oh, I was like, can't everybody do that? No, apparently
Nope.
not. Just
Nope. They
all
can't.
my friends on the team could. So that,
Right. Right.
okay. So let's say yes, you're like nodding your heads, parents, like, yep, that's my kid. But they're the Simone Biles who are doing great, and they're just that kid with the gorgeous leap, or they're the kid who can, get their shoulders where their coach wants them. What are some of the things that they want to watch out for to prevent injury happening, like injury that is more likely to happen to a kid who's really flexible like that?
Yeah. So the number one thing, and this goes for whether you're hypermobile or not, is no overstretching. And so overstretching is when you use mats to elevate in a extended position, most commonly a split or a middle split, and then you're putting weight on top of it. That is extremely dangerous and also extremely unnecessary. So that's the biggest thing to avoid and talk to coaches about. Under no circumstance in any sport is that necessary to hit your goals. You're much better off training actively and training strength so that you can use your mobility than sitting in a passive, overloaded position for minutes or sometimes even hours. When I was a kid, I literally used to tie my leg to my bed and sleep like that because that's what kids were doing in the cheer world. And
Yep.
no one said anything. And so that's one really big thing that I think needs to be emphasized more across the board. Now, when it comes to hypermobility specifically, depending on where you kind of fall, if it is a connective tissue disorder, it can impact every system in your body. So connective tissue lines literally everything in your body. And so some things to look out for might not seem as obvious. Things like GI issues, maybe they have IBS-like symptoms, that can be a warning sign. Any sort of subluxations or dislocations is always a yellow flag, always a warning sign. If your child is consistently subluxing or having more than one dislocation, I would screen and look deeper to see if there's something in this area going on. As well as complaining of pain in general that is more than the average kid would complain of, to the point where it's affecting their ability to do the things they want to do. If they're coming home and they're like, Mom, I can't do gymnastics right now, like this hurts really bad. Kids usually don't want to sit out. And so if they're complaining about that every single practice, dig a little bit deeper. Anything in the blood pressure, dizziness, heart palpitations realm would also be a yellow flag. That's something that can commonly come along with these conditions as well.
Okay, I'm just like reliving all of my trauma. But also, I used to sit in my splits to do homework. I was like, I will put my foot on the couch and sit with my leg all the way down. My coaches were constantly sitting on me, yanking on me. I think it's common knowledge now that, and I yanked on kids and I sat on kids because I was like, this is what we do. I
Yep.
think most people know, like, you don't sit on a kid while they're stretching.
I thought that, and then the Olympics came around, and there was way too many videos of Olympians getting sat on. So I think the message still needs to be emphasized more.
Yeah, but okay, so the kid who's really flexible should not be doing oversplits. They should be
No,
doing like kicks. They should be
kicks,
doing
exactly.
lifts
Correct.
or
Correct.
like on sliders where you're going out and in.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Controlling their mobility is the key here. Most kids who have splits really easily, they don't need to be doing more splits. They need to learn how to control their mobility so that their body positions can look more uniform and their lines can be more precise. Most kids who have hypermobility, and myself included, our form doesn't always look very pretty. And that's because we don't know how to control our mobility. It's not because we don't have it. It's not because we need more. We need to learn to control it.
Yes. Okay, so we have to rewind a little bit
Yes,
because
yes.
you are also a high-level athlete in a bendy sport. So you were a high-level club cheerleader. I would love to hear kind of your experience with hypermobility and how you got to doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, so I was an all-star cheerleader. I got to cheer on Top Gun Lady Jags. I actually got to have the experience of winning worlds, which was crazy. But I have a very rare experience in the hypermobile space, meaning I knew I was hypermobile since I was in second grade, which is really, really rare because most people don't. And so I actually had support from occupational therapists, chiropractors, physical therapists ever since I was a little girl. Before I even entered, maybe that's not true. At the same time I entered the sport, I would say. And so that really set me up for success because I had that level of support from a very, very young age. I would say the biggest things that were impacted as a kid was feeling like skills were a lot harder for me to get, and I had to try a lot harder than my friends to get the same skills, as well as sometimes I would try way, way harder and it would never even come. And a lot of that is because I didn't have the strength, and strength training wasn't a part of my story. And I wish it was. And then secondly, I did experience a lot of shoulder subluxations. Honestly, my whole life up until I became a chiropractor, until I figured this stuff out, I was having shoulder subluxations every day to 3 times a week on a good week. And so another big thing when I was a cheerleader is that my form was not very pretty. I would always get yelled at. My legs would never be together in my back handsprings. I would always have frog legs. I would step into my tumbling passes in frog legs because I didn't have that adductor strength to support myself at the time. And I didn't know that, and my coaches didn't know that. And so they would always just be like, squeeze, pretend there's a penny in your glutes and squeeze that penny. And like, I would do that, but it like wasn't happening because of my hypermobility. Now I know that. And so those were probably the biggest frustrations for me as a kid. Now looking back, I know that if I would have trained differently and conditioned differently, I could have had a much, much different experience. And I will also say the words coaches use did impact me, I think, more than a lot of people realize. I used to be called Gumby as a kid all the time. And it did affect my confidence when I was a little girl. And so coaches, just be careful with your words.
Yeah, that was my nickname too.
Yeah.
And you know, my mom always like said it was a badge of honor that I had
Yeah.
this, magical thing. But oh my gosh, I'm like vault was always hard for me because I couldn't get that block off my shoulders.
Yes.
Legs were always a part of my tumbling. The power was really hard for me because I was like this rubber band, kind of
Yeah.
flopping through, but I could outleap anybody. Like that was
Yes.
my thing. So okay, but I'm like, gosh, if I had all this information when I was a kid.
I
So
know.
you mentioned at one point to get yourself or your child screened if
Yeah.
you're like having these red flags raised. Who does this screening and what is that like?
Um, who does it is a harder question than what is it like. Who does it is people who specialize in this as of right now. Unfortunately, it is not being taught in schools, and there's not enough widespread education on it. We're trying to change that. But as of right now, going to the Ehlers-Danlos Society's website, there's a practitioners list. Look if anybody on there is in your area. That's a great place to start for people who will know how to screen for this. Unfortunately, there's not a validated screening tool as of yet. That might change soon. We'll see. But as of right now, finding a practitioner who understands this is your best bet. Now, what a screening should look like is very quickly, there's something called the Baton scale. It's not perfect, but it tests 9 of your joints. And if 5 or more of your joints are positive, for kids, it's 6 or more joints because kids are naturally more bendy, then you have generalized joint hypermobility. Then after that, you would go through some very specific systemic questions. And if you meet 5 of those systemic questions, then you move on to the third part, which would be blood work to see if you have any of the other forms of connective tissue disorders that we talked about at the beginning. And that's how you would get diagnosed in this realm. Now, diagnosis is not always needed. You can 100% ask a physical therapist if they're aware of this and to screen for this, and they can help with this without having a diagnosis. You do not need a diagnosis to have solutions in this realm. Another quick screening tool is something called the 5PQ. That one is better for adults. mainly because it doesn't force you to do the movements. It's just asking questions. And so if you're already symptomatic and you're already feeling things, there's no reason for us to put you into these positions. And so the 5PQ can be a great option as well. And then lastly, there's something called the lower limb assessment scale. That is a good one for the lower extremities to see if your lower extremities have any hypermobility.
Okay, so let's say yes. I mean, I think probably like most of us are like, yeah, I don't even think I need to screen for this. Like we got it. This is a
Yeah.
thing. What do coaches need to be aware of? What can parents do? Like, what's the solution?
Yeah. So the biggest thing I think coaches should be aware of is this population, when you have hypermobility, you are going to have athletes that are going to struggle a little bit more with certain skills. And so be patient with that. Create realistic expectations, put them on a timeline that matches them, not their peers. That would be first. Second is this population, it is harder for us to build muscle mass. And so having a strength training protocol is the most important thing that you can do for this population. And strength training is like lifting weights, not lifting 3-pound Pilates exercises. That is not strength training. Truly lifting weights is so beyond necessary and needed for this population. Third, something called proprioception, which is where is your body in space, is diminished in this population. We're slower with this. And so we don't always know that our high V is all the way out here. And so there are some things we can do, especially using external cues for this population that can really help with that, along with having just some little activities you can do on a day-to-day basis to help with your proprioception. Something as simple as when you're brushing your teeth, you stand on one leg and you close your eyes. That can go a really, really long way. And then instead of, if a cue isn't working, you're telling them to squeeze their legs, squeeze their legs, squeeze their legs. Change the cue, one, but two, try to see if it's actually a strength issue and not just that their brain and body aren't connecting. Because a lot of the time, if a cue isn't working for that long, it's not the cue, it's that there's an underlying strength issue that they actually just can't get it so that their legs are going to be together because their adductors don't have that strength yet. And so looking a little bit deeper and creating a true strength training routine for that population, as well as, like we talked about, no overstretching. And then conditioning in general, I have become more and more passionate about, especially as a retired athlete. We used to use running as our punishment or burpee tucks as our punishment, and that can really create a negative relationship with those movements as an adult. And so I would highly encourage coaches to look at their conditioning a little bit differently and instead ask yourself, what can I utilize as conditioning that's going to help my athlete, not just punish my athlete, and what's going to help them long term have a positive relationship with movement? Because once they're retired, they still have to exercise, they still have to work out, and if they are conditioned to hate running, they're going to hate it forever, and that really sucks.
Yeah, running.
Same.
I mean, I always joke that I can run a solid 60 feet because that was the vault runway and that's about all I got. And I have like 2 minutes of cardio in me because that was my floor routine. But I also think that the hypermobility has played a big part because my hips hurt when I run.
Yeah, yeah,
Everything just sort of like rattles out of place. I trained for a 5K and my hips will like never be the same.
yeah.
And so in that situation, should we be running or should we like just don't do the things that hurt and only strength train? Like, is there a balance?
So I'm never going to tell anybody not to do something that they love. And there's always a way to make some sort of activity tolerable and doable. Just a matter of how long is it going to take, and what do we do about it? And so running is not off limits for this population. And you don't have to run. If you hate running, don't force yourself to run. There's a lot of other ways you can get cardiovascular health and get your cardio in. But if you love running and you want to run, there is so much we can do to strengthen and stabilize those areas and start at a tolerable starting point and build our way up to running. And so it's definitely not off limits. It's really, is it worth it to you to put in that level of work is the real question.
And okay, so if I wanted to be a runner,
Yeah.
What would I have to do?
So
A pain-free
a
runner. What
pain-free
would I
runner.
have to
So
do?
work with a running coach would be my first suggestion, and I have some suggestions for you if you need any there. But the biggest thing with running is not going 0 to 100 and starting slow and going from our tolerable starting point. And if there's no what we label as comorbidities involved, and we're just talking hypermobility from a musculoskeletal standpoint, we need a really good strength training program that's going to create stability and confidence in the areas that are extra bendy so that we can learn to control that range of motion. We're also going to want to look at our stride and see, are there anything that we can improve in that realm? Looking at your shoes, different things in that realm is what I would recommend as a starting point if you are starting a running journey.
Yeah, and that I mean, there's so many great PTs in the world that's even specialized in gymnastics that can help with this. Because it's one thing to go, oh, it hurts. Okay, take some ibuprofen, take a week off, and go back to it, but you're still running in the wrong position and you still lack the strength. So the pain is going to keep coming back until you solve those critical problems.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're taking ibuprofen just to get yourself to run, that is your sign that you need to go see somebody to help you. That is not, we shouldn't be doing that.
Yep, agreed. I know. I hear, kids, how to go with the doctor. Oh, they just had to take a lot of ibuprofen and take a week off and then go back and go easy. And it's like, oh boy.
Yeah, and that's not the answer, one. And two, that's a big problem in the cheer and gymnastics world of doctors just saying, just rest for 2 weeks and then you go back to your sport, which is extremely intense with no guidelines on how to slowly start getting back into it. And there's pressure from your teammates and pressures from your coaches, and that's where a lot of injuries happen. And so good advice, especially if your kid is hypermobile. They're going to have slower recovery in general. Your timelines change when you're hypermobile. I like to always say double it. So if the doctor says rest for 2 weeks, I wouldn't rest, but have a plan that's going to build you back up in 4 weeks.
Yeah. And now, okay, I always think of things through the mental side because that's my cup of tea. And I think there's a lot of connections here that, you know, there's a fear of re-injury that happens in someone who's like, my ankles will roll at any minute. I had tape on my ankles, I had tiger paws on my wrists, I had like just to kind of hold the thing together.
Yeah.
And so if somebody, does the right kind of training, can they have stable wrists? Can they have stable ankles? Can they really trust that their bodies are not going to send them out every single competition season with a sprain? Is that
Yes.
is that possible
It is
for
possible.
us?
Yes, it is so possible. I see it all of the time. You just need the right approach. And let's talk about braces and tape while we're here. So there's a time and a place for braces and tape, but that time should never be always and 24/7 and every single time you're practicing and every single time you're doing your sport. If that's the case, your ankles or wrists or whatever you're using that brace is not strong enough, and it's not going to get any stronger if all you're doing is bracing it and hoping that that is gonna keep it together. And so I like to think of tape as kind of a neurological hug, if you will. Tape can make your brain pay more attention to that area, which can be really, really helpful. But if you're doing that 24/7, that brain body connection is already formed. It's not going to keep growing and keep changing and keep evolving. And so I would highly encourage you, if you are an athlete who's always using tape, always using braces every single time, go see a physical therapist, go see somebody that can help you with this, get true stability in that area, and learn when you should be using braces and tape instead of just relying on it always.
Okay, now I'm thinking about, I have a kid in my training group who is like, well, I'm coming back from surgery and my wrist still hurts, but I don't want to like say I should go to PT because my parents think that that's unnecessary or expensive or whatever. So, I mean, we've got a kid who's actually post surgery who's like, yikes, I don't want to ask my parents for that. And now I'm like, oh gosh, we like prevention would be incredible. But
Yes.
how do we let parents know that this actually is a worthwhile investment? And from your perspective, let's say that you have a 12-year-old gymnast who wants to go all the way in the sport and you know that they're hypermobile, how would you approach it from a parenting standpoint?
Yeah. So anytime anybody has surgery, they need to have an approach to get back to their sport full speed. Surgery is a lot on us. I think as a society, we kind of downplay going under anesthesia, getting cut open, and that experience from not just a physical standpoint, but a psychological standpoint as well. And if you don't have a plan to get back to your sport and you're just going from injury, surgery, straight back to your sport, you can almost guarantee your wrist is never going to be the same. And that's what we hear all the time. Yeah, my wrist is never the same. My ankle's never been the same. My knee's never been the same. That's usually why we hear that is because they didn't rehab properly. They didn't build themselves back up. They didn't create the confidence and strength needed in that area and the stability needed in that area to have their wrist maybe even be better than it was before surgery. That's a possibility too for some people. And so if I was a parent, I would encourage my kid to go to PT, especially after surgery. Not only is it worthwhile, I would say it's absolutely necessary if you want your kid to be able to enjoy the sport long term and not have a chronic unstable wrist or chronic injury keep popping up over and over again. I mean, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting something different. I don't think this is much different than that. We have to change something. We have to rebuild. We have to create new neural pathways, new tissue challenges after surgery. We just have to.
And then okay, let me go beyond that and go, okay, well, we don't want to have a surgery. We
Yes,
don't want to have you out for 6 months.
right.
Would you invest in your child in a prevention strategy?
1,000,000% yes. And I can literally say my mom did this for me as a kid, and it was quite literally the biggest game changer for me. But I would, if I had a daughter right now, she would be working with someone named Hannah Sadowski, who is the best virtual gymnastics coach, physical therapist, in my opinion, on the market right now. But I would have her have a 3 times a week bare minimum strength training protocol to make her the best at her sport and to make her confident in her sport, confident in herself. Strength builds confidence. Confidence builds good athletes. And so that's what I would do if I had a daughter.
Ooh, sounds hard. And like 14-year-old me is like, that sounds hard, Dr. Taylor. But at the same time, if I could get a giant and if I could do back handspring on a beam and if I could do a vault that had some power behind it, would it be worth 3 times a week of training? Yes,
And
100%, unquestionably.
as a kid too, like my playtime, like play dates with my friends was always like stretching or playing on our trampoline and doing little routines and making up routines. And like, if we start incorporating strength training at a young age, that can start being fun for kids. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be this thing we hate. You can make it fun. And anything you start at a young age, you're more likely to enjoy it and you're more likely to be good at it. And so you're going to want to do it more. And so I think if we just started strength training younger, we wouldn't have that connotation around it. It wouldn't have that negativity around it or that, oh, I don't want to do this. It's hard. It would be exciting and you can make it
Yes.
exciting.
So true. And so I have a 9.5-year-old and a almost 7-year-old, and they both have just started into gymnastics, which, any of us are like, okay, good luck with that, you tall 9-year-old. But I've been, the old gymnast, and I'm like, hey, if you fall in love with your sport at 9, great. And so my kid's like, spot me on all the things, mom. And I'm like, okay, I wrote a book on don't coach your kid. So don't coach your kid, but I'm like, let's do some core work.
Yeah,
Let's have a little handstand contest against the wall.
yeah,
Let's do, whatever. Like let's do a little chin hold and like, oh my gosh, this is hard for me. But they are like, let's do it again. Or, when the commercial comes on, we do this. Or if, that someone says this word on The Voice, then we do like 5 of these, and they love it. And, my husband loves it. I'm like, okay, like crack the wrists, like I'll get out there with you. But there's nothing better, I think, than a coach or a parent getting out there and like, doing conditioning with the kid. Like they
yeah.
love that
And
so much.
gamifying it. Gamifying it is such an adult should gamify stuff too. Like the more you gamify your life, the more enjoyable your life is going to be.
Yes, absolutely. They have a little marble jar where if
I love
they
that.
then it's for tries. If they try something, they get a marble. Not
That's
I
awesome.
was like, this is not about making it or even having it be good, but every time you try because you're getting stronger and that's
Yes,
what's going
and
to
more
get you
resilient.
those skills.
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly, exactly.
Yes. Okay, so I noticed on in some of your content that you talk about managing your hypermobility with mindfulness. And I was like, "What? How are those two connected?" Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is more geared towards adults that are in chronic pain, I would say, than minors who hopefully do not have that experience and hopefully never will. But unfortunately, a lot of people in the hypermobile space, in the hypermobile world, deal with a lot of chronic pain, a lot of medical gaslighting, a lot of really weird, scary symptoms that no one can explain, and a lot of blaming and shame. And so the mental component of living with a chronic illness is really, really imperative. And I don't believe you can heal physically if your mental health is not where it needs to be. And in my opinion, they go hand in hand. And if you are living in chronic pain, there is things that we can do from a mindset standpoint, and mindset shifts can be a huge game changer for this population in so many different aspects in so many different ways. And one specifically that we talk about a lot is flare management. And so flares are any symptom that you have is heightened to a point where you are debilitated, meaning you can't do something you want to do. And so if you're in a flare and you're thinking this is forever and you're never going to get better, you're not. And so the mindset shifts here are that this is temporary. You've been through it before. You're going to get through it again. You're going to use all the tools in your corner, and this isn't your fault. Little things like that can be really, really helpful so that you don't get stuck in a flare loop that you can never get out of.
Yeah, I mean, that's my headaches. That's I got as I was a cheerleader, I got launched in the end zone onto my neck, and
Yeah.
then not long after, I did a flyaway to my neck off of bars, and like forever, that is the place where the headaches come up, and then Dr. Carissa helps me, and I feel better again. But that's so important because I think there is this story around, well, those things happened, so therefore, this is always going to be part of my life.
Yeah,
And
and there's a huge stigma in the hypermobile space that, well, it's just the way that you are, so there's nothing we can do. You're never going to get better. Live with it. That's not true. There's so much we can do. Like so much we can do.
Yeah, like the back pain of all those back walkovers where I didn't have the core strength to support the back. It's like all of this makes so much sense that with strength training and with kind of releasing those stories of this is how it has to be, you
Yes.
really can have less pain and be more functional.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And
okay.
And I would also say, especially for kids too, but especially for adults, finding strategies that you can do on your own for short-term relief so you don't have to rely on your chiropractor. You don't have to be dependent on your chiropractor. I have a lot of clients who will come to me so scared to go on vacation because they're so scared to leave their chiropractor in case they get in a flare. That's a really not great place to be in, to feel that dependent on somebody. And so finding strategies that you are confident in will give you short-term relief can be a huge life-changing thing.
Yes, yes. And during COVID, the headaches were so bad and I hadn't seen a chiropractor in forever. And I did online PT through Kaiser and was like, are you serious? But it totally like it did the thing. And I have my exercises and now I'm like, oh, it's hurting. If I can do this, I can lay on this foam roller, I can do this with my
Yep.
head. And just to have that sort of like, I can do it myself is so important. And I know you work virtually with only adults. Can you tell us a little bit about what your work is like when you're doing
Yeah.
hypermobility coaching?
Yeah, so I call myself a hypermobility coach now. We work completely virtually. We do only work with adults, and we create full exercise programs, full strength training programs that take into consideration any comorbidities that you might be dealing with. We also do something called flare tracking to create what we call a flare routine so that we can decrease the intensity and frequency of our flares. This is exactly what we just talked about, creating those self-management strategies, as well as finding triggers in your control or out of your control and creating a proactive and reactive routine around them. And then we also will help our clients build their care team. Like I said, this population deals with a lot of medical gaslighting and a lot of misunderstanding. And so we can help you prepare for your doctor's appointments and kind of prioritize what doctors are going to be the most important to have on your care team, as well as constant communication. That's the most important piece, in my opinion. I think every single chiropractor, allied health professional, every medical professional needs to communicate with their patients and clients more because things happen, life happens. And when you kind of have that support right in your pocket, it can really, really be a big, big game changer.
Yeah, I just like was thinking about interviewing you today and I was thinking about like these poor coaches. They basically need to have PhDs, MDs, PTs, DCs. They need all of the degrees to be able to
Oh,
do all of the things that they're supporting.
yeah.
But thank goodness for the internet that they can
Yes.
just be like, hey, parents, follow this person. Hey, find this person on Instagram and you can find some drills for that. So they
Yep.
don't actually have to wear all the hats like I felt like I had to when I was coaching because there are so many great resources. So, how do they follow you if people have questions or if they want to take advantage of your resources?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram, the Hypermobile Chiro, as well as my website, thehypermobilechiro.com. I also have a resources page on my website. That's a really good place to start. It has all of the stuff we talked about today, especially the stuff at the beginning. And my DMs are always open. Feel free to message me on Instagram. If I can't help, I will find you somebody who can. I have a huge network in this space, whether it's gymnastics, dance, cheerleading, whatever it may be. I would love to help anybody in this space.
Amazing. Dr. Taylor Goldberg, you're so fun to hang out with, and I feel so much better about myself now.
I'm glad. That's always a good thing. And then I will just give Hannah a little bit of a plug. If you do have an athlete who is a minor, Hannah Sadowski, I'll give you her information as well. She is amazing as a virtual coach and physical therapist for young gymnasts. I would highly encourage checking her out as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.